This afternoon, we're going to give you some tips and tricks to help prepare for your poster presentation, to build on what we looked at on Tuesday regarding actually designing your poster. We're recording this session. I'm happy for the slides to be shared afterwards as well. So if you're here representing your team, you could definitely encourage your team members to go back and have a look at the recording, but it's always so much better if you're here, because we'll be listening to things, watching things, discussing things, and going out into breakout rooms and what have you, to practice as well. So you'll get lots of benefit by joining us today. And Danika's with us again today, which is wonderful. So she'll also be giving you some extra insights into what to expect as you prepare for your presentations, but also on the day as well, because she's been absolutely instrumental in organising Endeavour this year. Oh, and I should say I'm Ariana. I'm Ariana Henderson from Academic Skills, for those of you who weren't here on Tuesday. So today we really want to cover probably four key things, four key skills. Looking at how you can design your presentation for your audience, actually learning how to present to camera, because it's something that is new for a lot of us and something that we're needing to do this year. Learning how to purposely practice your presentation, and we'll do a purposeful practice. And learning how to prepare for and answer questions, because there'll be multiple opportunities throughout Endeavour where you'll be expected to answer questions about your work as well. Actually, I wonder if, Danica, that's probably a good point for us to just remind everyone, what are the key components that they need to be preparing for?
So one is knowing what your project is about, so you can present that to people. I always, when we present with our team, we do a dummy run through where we get someone else not involved in the project to ask us questions. That way we know what we're missing out on, what isn't really clear, something that someone that's not already involved. And that really helps us understand what the best way to present is. So that's also, in a way, sort of selling your project. The other key to go through, especially with the Road to Endeavour, is the background of your project. So not what it does, but why you created it, what challenges you're addressing, what innovations it's doing to the engineering and IT community, any other background information that's relevant, so people don't just say, oh, you know, it's a computer program, it's another computer program on the market. And then networking with industry guests. So if you're applying for an award, to be able to sell your projects really well in a short 3-minute presentation. So doing that really confidently. So those are the main things, I think.
Fantastic. So we've got the Road to Endeavour video of why we've done what we've done and how did we put it all together. You've got a lot of freedom with that. Your 5-minute pre-recorded formal presentation, which is just you selling your product, and a 3-minute pitch if you're a finalist for an award. Okay, fantastic. And question and answer that goes alongside both for the award shortlisted groups, Q&A on the day itself at 2 points during the day with attendees, and potentially Q&A with your assessor if you're being assessed for this as well. Okay, so these are the things we're preparing for you for today. So if we're thinking about your formal presentation, because we'll focus most on that, and we'll veer off a little bit onto Q&A and the pitch, etc. But our main focus is the formal presentation. Really, your poster is there to get the conversation started or generate interest in your project, whereas your pitch or your presentation is your chance to add detail and really extend that interest. So in this case, it's 5 minutes. It's pre-recorded. It'll be uploaded alongside your poster. You can mention your poster or refer to your poster in your presentation, but most of the focus needs to be on you. So if you need to cut to a slide with a particular figure on it, or a graph or an image or something, you can, but really most of the focus is on you presenting. When you're deciding what to include in your presentation, you really want to ask yourself, what do I think my audience most wants to know? And there's going to be, again, similar to your poster, varying levels of background knowledge. So really thinking about how can you pitch your idea in such a way that a wide range of people are going to be able to understand it. We don't want to dumb it down so much that people feel patronized, but we also don't want to make anyone feel stupid because they can't understand what you're talking about and it's going over their heads. They're just going to stop your video and move on to someone else. In some ways, it's more brutal than if you were doing it in person. It's much harder maybe for someone to move away from you at the Endeavour exhibition if you're already engaging with them. But in this case, they'll just switch off your video and move on to the next. So we really want to get that level right. So I'll give you some tips on how to do that. While you're thinking about that, I think one key aspect of it isn't just to tell them the what, like what you did, what you created, the process that you went through, what have you, but actually often the audience is more interested in your interpretation. So saying things like, we did this is important because, or this tells us that, this points to a need for, or this showed us the importance of. That's when your audience is really going to get a richer insight into the significance of your project. They shouldn't have to guess these things, even though it's probably quite obvious to you. It's helpful for your audience to, if you spell that out. It's true for your writing as well as for your presentations as well. So if you can focus, obviously partly on the description, but more on the interpretation, that's going to really, really help your audience to understand what you've done and why you've done it in that particular way and the significance of what you've done. I want to show you an example of this. We're going to look at two videos really quickly. And I want, as you're watching the video, to think about the language that the presenter is using to talk about this, and how this is pitched in terms of kind of level of expertise. So they're both about how a microwave works. Let's watch just a minute of the first one.
Something that almost most of us are familiar with, where we have magnetic fields and moving charges, has to do with microwave ovens. How do microwave ovens work? Well, they need to produce microwaves. Microwaves is an electromagnetic radiation. And how do we produce electromagnetic radiation? Well, typically we do that by making electrons accelerate. One way to do that is through an antenna. Let's say we have an antenna and we polarize the antenna. We make one side positive, the other side negative, so that positive charges move in one direction, negative charges move in the other direction. And then we switch polarity. When we switch polarity, we make electrons move up and down, and the electrons moving up and down, accelerate back and forth, will produce electromagnetic radiation. We do radio broadcasting that way, for example. But microwave ovens don't work that way. They work with what we call magnetrons, a very strong magnet, and allowing electrons to rotate or move in circular paths. Now, we already knew that, because when electrons move in circular paths, that's caused by the magnetic field, for example. So let's say we have a electron moving in this direction, right there. So velocity is in this direction. Since electron, negative charge, use our left hand. Put your left hand and the fingers in the direction of the motion electron. Then turn your hand to turn your move the other.
Okay, I'll pause that one there. And now I'm going to show you a second video. This is also talking about how a microwave works.
This is a food heating radio box.
Ah.
It uses radio waves to heat food. Different kinds of radio machines use different sizes of waves, but this radio box uses the same size of wave as computer hotspots in your house. It starts with the power changer, which turns the power from the wall into a kind of power that's better for making radio waves. Then the radio wave maker lets power fly around through the spaces inside it. This builds up a radio wave of a certain size, like how an empty bottle plays a certain note if you blow over the hole at the top. The radio waves then move down the radio hallway and into the food box. The metal spinner changes the shape of the radio waves, so the warm spots, where the waves are strong, move around a little.
Okay, I'll pause that there. And I'd really love to hear your impressions of what you just saw. So the first was delivered, of course, by a physics expert. He's assuming some knowledge of you all. And the second was presented using only the 1,000 most common words in the English language. So there were certain words to do with the microwave that they couldn't use because they're not in that list of 1,000 most commonly used words, which is why they were calling it a food heating radio box rather than a microwave. So in the chat, or if you want to take yourself off mute and let us know what you think, what do you think about those two different ways of explaining the same concept?
Can I add a first thought, even though I'm not really part of this?
Yes, please.
I really like that they use an analogy in it. For me, I don't understand engineering, so using analogies, I know my science sisters always tell me off, but imagining it something in a way that you can understand, like a cartoon, is really helpful. So
thank you. That's really good insight. And that's a nice technique, actually, no matter what you're presenting. And we see this often in TED Talks, actually. It's very rare that an expert stands up at a TED Talk and launches straight into their area of expertise. They almost always start with a concept that's very familiar to the audience, and the audience can feel part of it, like, oh yeah, I get that, I've experienced that, I understand that. And then they build on it and build on it and build on it until they eventually get to the concept they're actually wanting to share with you. Thanks, Danica. What other insights do you have? We're looking at language here.
is this where you pick on someone now?
Yuan Long says the second one is much easier to understand. Yeah. Clear, direct. They're using language we can understand. Any other insights? Does anyone disagree, or? Do we have to, oh, sorry, we've got a question. So this isn't related to the videos, but do we have to record our face for the whole video, or can we just show like the second video talking while showing the animation? Danica, the idea with particularly with the formal presentation, is that you're featured in the presentation, is that right?
Yes, so in your actual exhibition day presentation, it's better to show your face because it's like you're talking to that person and exhibiting your project to them. In your Road to Endeavour one, you can definitely use a lot more graphics and less of your face, but it would still be great if you could pop up just so people know who you are.
We'll look at some examples later, Edvert, of how you can make sure that you're emulating the experience of someone being there. So using your eye contact, using gestures, things like that. We'll look at all of that later on.
I feel like, sorry, just a comment on the video.
Yeah, thanks, Gabrielle.
I feel like it was because they were restricted to the most common words and there was only 1,000 of them.
Yeah.
Kind of had a hint of condescension, maybe.
Yeah, it was almost too low.
Dumbed down.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We don't need to hear food heating radio box because we actually know what a microwave is, for example.
Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe you're wanting to go somewhere in between.
I think so. Coming from an engineering background, though, I did like the first one. It kind of taught me a thing or two, but from an actual perspective of a everyday person who we're going to be presenting to, somewhere in between would probably be perfect.
I think that's fair. I think it's a really fair assessment. Kweku has also made a good point that the explanation in the first one got deeper as we went along. Even if you missed what he said earlier, you could kind of catch up later on. But yeah, B was quite simplistic. So we're not wanting to go quite that far down the line, are we? Carmen makes a point that the first video was less insightful, as he explained concepts that were irrelevant about how a microwave works. So we were getting right into the physics of it rather than this is physically how a microwave works, like we saw in the second one. Is that what you mean, Carmen, maybe? Yeah. Kind of, because we were actually looking at physically where the radio waves are traveling, what's happening with the food spinning, things like that. Catherine makes a point. The first guy had a more engaging voice. Yeah, that's a good point. So engaging voice actually matters, doesn't it? We can add a lot of interest to what we're saying by emphasizing certain words, particularly any concepts that you want your listener to pay attention to that you think is important. You can make your voice a little bit louder and a little bit higher on those words to emphasize them. You can also use your intonation to add interest to what you're saying too, which we didn't see in the second one. It almost sounded like one of those maybe mechanical voices that was just reading out a script or something like that. This is very particular to some languages and not other languages. So if your first language has a lot of intonation, this won't be too challenging for you. But if your first language is quite monotone, it might be something to practice, and we'll do some practice later on, get some feedback from each other, and you might get an insight into maybe is emphasis or stress something you need to focus on, is intonation something you need to focus on, is there something else you can do to add interest for the audience, because you want to be interesting enough that people will keep watching and not switch off. I think you made a really good point, and we'll keep picking up on that. Thanks everyone for your insights. We're going to look at some more videos now, but this time I'm going to let you choose which videos you watch. So every, I don't know if anyone's ever been to this, but every year, all over the world, there's a competition, a presentation competition called 3-Minute Thesis, or 3MT. It's where a PhD student is able to stand up and they need to pitch their entire thesis research in 3 minutes. They're allowed 1 slide. So the focus is very much on them and their story. And they need to pitch it in such a way that people who aren't experts in their particular field can understand. So in an intelligent audience, an interested audience, but not necessarily an expert audience. So I'm going to pop this link into the chat. And in just a moment, so click on the link, start having a look around on that website. There's a whole heap of talks there. If you can go to the 2020 talks, they're particularly good to look at because, of course, last year's talks were done in an auditorium. 2020's talks, everyone recorded them at home. So you get a bit of a sense of what it's like to watch a formal oral presentation where it's just the person and maybe 1 slide giving their pitch in their house. You can choose anyone you like to watch. It'll only take 3 minutes. You don't even have to watch the whole 3 minutes if you don't want to. Just a minute would be fine. You can either, in your breakout room, choose to watch the same video all together. You can each watch different ones and then talk about it. But the thing that I'd really like you to think about as you're watching the video and discussing it with the others is, what did you notice about the language that they've used? How easy is it for you to understand, particularly if it's outside of your area of expertise? What is their pace like? Are they speaking very fast, very slow? Are they pausing at key points in the pitch to add emphasis and get you thinking about something? What is their intonation or their tone like? And also pay attention to things like their dress. So there's if you look at previous year's presentations, there's some real consistency in the level of formality of dress. But this year, it's much more varied. So I'd be really curious to hear your impressions of that, looking at their posture, looking at their eye contact with the camera, and any gestures that they're using, because we can see not just their head like you're seeing with us today, but you can see a good portion of their torso so that we can see their gestures in their arms, because they're being judged on that. Yeah. You can watch it with the sound on or the sound off. It's up to you. If you just listen to the sound, then you can comment on the speech. If you watch it without, you can comment on how they look. I'm going to pop you just into some small breakout rooms now so that you get a chance to talk to some others about the video that you choose to watch. And I'll bring you back just in a couple of minutes. Okay, so when you get your invitation, click accept and we'll see you shortly. If you can have a little bit of a think about if there's any really key insights that you got from watching the video now that you can share with us, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Were there any standouts? If you can maybe just pop something in the chat. Was there anything that you saw, like actually I think the dress was too formal or too informal, or they were all really good at looking at the camera while they spoke, or anything at all? I'd love to hear what did you take away from that? What was important? What made the biggest difference?
A couple of the points mentioned in our discussion were consistent eye contact. We watched the winner and the runner-up, and it was very consistent.
Really?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the other thing we noted was the neutral colours used, which is very similar to reporting or any news broadcasting service.
Do you mean neutral colours in what they wore or their background?
Mostly what they wore, but now you said background, that's also a good point.
Yeah, and that's advice that the video team gives us at the university too, and I think Danica's included it in a little fact sheet for you all. Is things like don't wear stripes because it appears weird on the screen, and as you say, newsreaders know that kind of thing too. It's a really good point. Christian makes a good point about they're using their hands and their body language to try and convey a point, and they use it really effectively to emphasize certain points too, don't they? Ben's also noticed the eye contact and the speech. They weren't rushing it, were they? They'd practiced and practiced and practiced that talk to the point where they knew it was going to fit within the 3 minutes. And that's really what you want you and your team to be able to do as well. You've got 5 for your main presentation, 3 if you're a finalist for an award, but practicing it so that you know you can comfortably fit the whole talk in to the time means you're not going to rush, makes it easier for everyone to follow, etc. The practice really shows.
Out body language. I know that a lot of you are pretty tempted to just do a voiceover over your presentation because it may be the first time you're presenting on screen, and it is a bit daunting. But from what you can see on the videos here, seeing that person in front of you using their hands when they talk, looking at you, is going to be a lot more engaging, because imagine if you were just watching a PowerPoint with a voiceover, you might also just switch off. So think about how you want to present to your audience. Yeah,
that's a really, really good point. There's a point made by Christian as well about their tone, and they weren't being really monotone in their voice. They were engaging, and I think too, hopefully you felt their passion for their research. They really cared about what they've done. If they feel like it matters, they feel like it's important, and they want you to know that too. They want you to be excited with them. And I hope you feel the same about your project and you're able to convey that enthusiasm too. Edward is asking, like, is it more like a 3-minute thesis competition or more like a TED Talk? Is that your question?
I mean, it doesn't have to be. It's just how you want to get your message across. So it can be more TED Talk-like. It can be in any form that you feel comfortable with. So you probably have a lot of different lecturers. How did they present their content as well? So you can definitely have a look at how they do it and compare it to these videos and see how you want to do your videos.
Really good point. Was there another comment in the chat there?
Yeah, someone's just asked if,
I film our team in Zoom, eating while presenting, or film individuals with a separate camera. That's a really good question, Demi.
So I think for an audience viewpoint, filming separately with a camera is more engaging. But again, Zoom is completely fine. Everyone knows what Zoom is. And if you want all of your team members on the screen at the same time, then Zoom is what you've got. So you can definitely do a mix. I would probably suggest a mix. So you can go into Zoom with all of your team members, and then spotlight, and then go to one person and then another person.
We've got lots of options, which is nice. So particularly in relation to the fact that you're filming this, and this is why I wanted to share those 3MT videos with you, because it is very much more similar to what you're experiencing this time around, in that it's the camera that you're making eye contact with rather than the audience. And that is something that takes a little bit of time to get used to. I once read, I don't know if you grew up in Australia, you'd remember watching a kids show called Play School when you're a child. And I remember the presenters once saying that they stare down that camera as if that camera is a little 4 or 5-year-old child sitting at home, and they speak to that camera as if they're speaking directly to that child. And I think that as a mindset, that takes a lot of time to get used to, because it's not a child, it's a camera. And we're not used to trying to engage with this inanimate object. So practicing that so that it looks very real and authentic is going to be really, really key. Anything you can do to project confidence as well on camera through your posture and your movements, and again, recording yourself, having a look at it, as embarrassed as you might feel, will give you a lot of insight into how much confidence you're projecting. And the movement that you do can help to work off nerves as well, we often find, as well as demonstrate passion for your project. When you're delivering your presentation, we'd really encourage you not to write a script and then memorize the script, because it will come across that way, unless you've got a teleprompter and you're really, really good at delivering something that sounds like it's natural even when it's not. Most of us can't do that very easily. So instead, have some key points that you want to talk about and tell your story. Don't memorize it necessarily. It was a really good comment was made before about the pace that you noticed for those 3MT contestants. They were speaking nice and slowly. And if you have to go one end or the other, too slow is always better than too fast. You can pause along the way. The pause will sound like a long time for you, but it won't for your audience. It builds emphasis too, particularly if you've just made a really, really important point. Having a pause and then moving on, it will add even more gravitas to what you've just said. It does usually mean, though, cutting down the amount of content that you're trying to pack into that presentation. Remember, you still have Q&A, question and answer time that you can use if the audience wants to know more. Depending on if you're using your laptop or if you're using your phone, ideally, if you can have the camera at eye level, not sort of above eye level where you're like looking up at it, or below eye level where you're looking down and they're seeing double chins and things like that. So really positioning it, like I've got a huge stack of books here today. I'm sure lots of people are doing something similar. Will be really, really helpful. Of course, choose something somewhere quiet. And I know that sounds really obvious, but if you sit in a room and you close your eyes and just listen to the noises around you, you might be surprised how much can be heard. So pay attention to that. Don't have any kind of pinging or notifications going off. Again, it sounds really obvious, but it'd be a really easy thing to forget. And imagine if you're 4 minutes into your 5-minute talk and then suddenly someone's alert starts going off. That's going to really ruin the video and everyone's going to be frustrated and have to start all over again. Natural light is very, very helpful for videos as well. If you can, you don't have to be facing it directly, but having it sort of nearby or to the sides. I think for me, I've got light coming in this way today, but if it's still a little bit too dark, you can position a desk lamp to your advantage. So not having the desk lamp directly at you necessarily where it's blinding you or washing you out, but you can, for example, if you're facing a wall, you can push the desk lamp so that it illuminates the wall, and that reflection can come back at you too. And think about your backgrounds before you set up as well. So a lot of those 3MT contestants were trying to, I think, find like a really blank wall to stand against. If that's not possible for you, at least trying to clear out too many distracting things from behind you before you start. When you do decide what type of device to use, for most of us anyway, our phones have better cameras on them than our computer. You might even have a really great camera at home, I'm not sure. But do think about that. What's going to give you the best footage? If you have access to an external mic, amazing, you're going to get even better sound. Of course, that's not necessarily going to be possible. We've got some questions there in the chat, actually, Danica.
Yeah, someone just said, is there a reason there's no background music? You can definitely include background music into your video. Just make sure you're using royalty-free ones, so no pop songs on the radio or anything like that. We don't want you getting sued for copyright. So definitely look at royalty-free. I did put one link into the video brief that I sent out, I think 2 weeks ago. That also has a lot of the tips and tricks that Ariana's got here today for presenting.
And Gabrielle's made a point as well that a lot of the presenters that we saw for the 3MT competition was standing rather than sitting. And that is something definitely worth considering, because you're freer usually if you're standing to use that posture and that body language and that stance and that confidence and those gestures to convey your meaning. Sometimes we're a little bit hamstrung if we're sitting down. But that's something to discuss with your team and decide on with your team. This might have been what you shared, Danica, was it? I wonder.
Don't think so.
Ooh, okay. Well, if you haven't seen this, there are a ton more really nice tips and tricks that have been shared by our team at Learning Environments, because they know everyone's having to record things online at the moment, and there's a whole team dedicated to creating film at the university. So we get to benefit from their expertise in this particular clip. And there are a whole heap more that are related to that, particularly, for example, if you're deciding to film on your phone. So if I'll put this link in the chat as well. I'd particularly encourage you to have a look at these 4. The recording with your mobile device. They've got some really nice tips on, how you can position your phone in a particular way. You don't even need to have a fancy tripod to make it work. They've got some really good tips there, some really great sound tips, some tips about telling an engaging story and projecting that confidence on camera. And actually, I think to follow on from the point that was made earlier, in all of these examples, they're standing rather than sitting in presenting. Whereas I think the tips from the previous link that I just shared with you, the recording like a pro, they're sitting, because they're not just trying to give advice to students presenting online, but they're actually trying to give advice to your lecturers as well, who are having to also present online. And in most cases, they're sitting down at their computer trying to deliver a lecture or something like that. Whereas these videos are specifically designed for self-recording your own footage, usually on your phone. So hopefully that's a nice little gift to help. We want to practice really briefly. This is low stakes, no stakes at all, no pressure. Not going to be a big group. We'll just do little pairs for this one. It's just a little chance for you to tell someone else about the project that you've been passionately working on this year, and to get a sense of how easily they can understand your project based on the language that you're using to talk about it. If you can just tell them what's the most important thing about your project, why should they be interested in your project, and maybe leave them with a sentence that gives a good impression. Be yourself. You don't have to be a salesperson. just be natural. And ideally, they'll be able to give you a little bit of feedback on what they saw and what they heard. There's one thing to say, practice your presentation, practice. But if you're practicing the wrong thing, you're just going to get good at that thing. So instead, what I encourage you to do is purposefully practice. So when you go into the breakout room and you tell someone in 30 seconds what your project was about, if they give you some feedback around your language or your pace or your tone or what have you, pay attention to that and practice that specific thing. when you're practicing your presentation, you're much more likely to get a good outcome. How you spend your time is way more important than how much time you spend. So these are the kinds of things that you might want to give feedback on. Again, no pressure. Be kind to each other, but also I'm guessing you'd rather your breakout room partner to be honest with you too. No one else hears the feedback, only you, and only you're going to benefit from it at the end of the day. So I'm going to pop you actually into, there we go, breakout rooms of 2. And we'll give you just three minutes or so, 30-second pitch each, a little bit of feedback, and we'll come back together. Enjoy. Welcome back, everyone. I can see some smiling faces. It must have been nice to be able to talk to somebody else. I'm so glad. Thanks for trying that out for me, and I do hope you benefited from it. And I hope you were in a room with someone who was generous enough to give you some tips on what you were doing well and what could help in the future. If you have been given feedback on any of the points listed on the left-hand column there, I've included some tips on the right-hand column as to what you could do to purposefully practice that particular aspect of your presentation. So something like if they've said, oh, you know, you're able to explain the concept really well, but your voice is a little bit monotone, then when you're practicing your presentation, you almost want to overemphasize, like overtone, overstress. And doing that while you practice almost to an over-the-top level will mean come filming day, it'll come back down to the level that you want it to be at. Okay, these slides will be available to you afterwards as well. So just to remind you all, in addition to you doing the Road to Endeavour video and your 5-minute pitch video, presentation video, you'll also have live video discussion time with attendees. So you'll have 2 one-hour slots during the day at 12 and at 3 during the exhibition for attendees to drop by and ask you questions. And then for the rest of the day, someone from your team will always need to be available on the comment box to answer any questions that way. In addition, you might have some scheduled time with your supervisor to answer questions, to present to them and answer questions for them. And if you've been shortlisted for an award, there'll be a Q&A session after your 3-minute pitch to them. So there'll be lots of opportunities where you'll need to answer questions about your project. You can do some work in advance for that. You can predict what kinds of questions you think they might ask you, and maybe even think about any supporting material that you want to have handy to be able to help supplement your answers. In some ways, you're lucky that you're doing this from home compared to actually at the event, because normally you'd have to almost like carry some handouts with you or carry some extra data with you or something to supplement any tricky questions that might come your way. But you'll have a lot more to hand than you normally would have. But having thought about it in advance and having it readily available will make your answers sound really smooth. So do anticipate in advance the kinds of questions that might be asked. As Danica said, if you can practice your presentation to someone who doesn't know very much about your project, see what kinds of questions they ask you. That'll give you a little bit of a clue as to what you want to prepare for. Listen really carefully to the question that they ask you. You don't want to be like a politician and just answer a completely different question and sound a bit foolish. So listen really carefully and make sure you do understand what they've asked of you. You can clarify if you need to too. If you think that they've asked you something that you're really not sure of, it's okay. Don't panic. You're able to talk through it before you answer. So things like double checking that you have actually understood the question. So something like, so what you're asking me is, or so is this what you mean? That makes sure that you've understood their question, and it gives you some thinking time too. Be really polite when you're answering their question, even if you think it's a really silly question or it's offended you in some way. oh, that's a great question. That's outside of our scope of our project, but what I can tell you is this. So don't be too put off if you do get asked a tricky question. You never know who that person might be and what potential they might have to your project. Be really honest. If you don't know the answer, it's okay. We'd much rather you tell them that. I don't know about that, but what I can tell you is this. Sometimes you can give them some different information instead that you would like them to hear about. But be honest if you don't know. You don't have to make it up. And it's okay to take your time. You don't have to rush straight in to giving an answer. A pause will sound long for you, but it really won't be that long for the person who asked you the question. So just to reconfirm, I've got this right. The Road to Endeavour video is due on the 18th, so in about a week's time. And that's the video where you can really cut together a whole heap of different footage, isn't it, Danica? You can use slides if you want to. You can have footage of you working on your project, all sorts of things. But the exhibition presentation video, which is that formal 5-minute presentation video, is Friday the 9th of October. And the details of how to submit those videos is at the bottom of the screen there. And it's also available on the website too, isn't it? If anyone needs to double check any of those details.
I've sent this in a brief to all your emails, so hopefully you got that. So I think it was on Tuesday. But the most important thing is please name your files. I can't tell you last year how many people sent me a file that said poster. So please name your files.
In this case, we'll have a lot of files called video.
Yeah. So don't do that to me.
Don't do that.
Because if it's a video, I probably wouldn't be able to tell who it was.
Excellent. So department name, team leader's name, and what kind of video it is. And then that'll make everyone's life so much easier.
Yes.
Fabulous. It's been lovely having you all with us this afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to join us. If you do want to stick around briefly and ask any more questions, you're very, very welcome to. Otherwise, best of luck for Endeavour. It's going to be one of the highlights, I hope, of your degree. And there's actually a lot of advantages to you doing it online this year. So don't be disheartened by that. Take advantage of it. And all of the different participants that will be joining on the day that maybe wouldn't have otherwise. Thanks, everyone.